You wouldn't have thought much of it if you passed by. Just an old, faded truck tucked beside the fence, paint long since chipped, hood dented in one corner, and a couple of weeds curling up around the tires. To most folks, it looked like junk. To the HOA, it looked like a violation. But to me, it looked like her. That truck was the first thing my grandma ever bought with her own money. Back in the early 60s, when women couldn't open a bank account without their husband's signature, Grandma found a way. She saved up cash working night shifts at the local diner and tucked every dollar into a Folgers coffee can beneath the floorboard. Took her nearly 3 years, but she did it. Bought herself that Ford pickup, forest green, chrome bumper, bench seat that smelled like cinnamon gum and motor oil. She named it Hank. Don't ask me why, she never explained it. But she'd say, "Come on, Hank," every time she turned the key, and he'd always rumble awake like he knew who was in charge. When Grandpa passed in '85, Grandma kept Hank running. She'd drive him to the farmer's market every Saturday, window down, Patsy Cline on the radio. Sometimes she'd park him right in the middle of her garden, using the tailgate as a potting bench. Neighbors would walk by and chuckle. Some admired her stubbornness. Others just shook their heads. But no one said anything out loud, not until Karen moved in. Karen showed up about 2 years ago, fresh from some city where rules were gospel and appearances were everything. She wore pastel blazers even when it was 90 degrees and carried a clipboard like it was welded to her arm. The kind of person who introduced herself with her title, "Hi, I'm Karen, I'm on the HOA board." She didn't even last a week before commenting on Grandma's truck. I was in the driveway helping Grandma carry in groceries when Karen slowed her Lexus and rolled down the window. "Oh," she said, with that tone of syrupy politeness. "Is that vehicle going to be staying there long?" Grandma didn't miss a beat. "He was here before the HOA, and he'll be here after it." Karen smiled like she'd just tasted sour milk. "Right, well, it just doesn't exactly fit the aesthetic we're going for, does it?" I swear, the temperature dropped 5 degrees when Grandma turned and looked her in the eye. "Well, I don't recall the neighborhood having an aesthetic when I planted half those trees you're now calling landscaping." Karen's window rolled up fast. But that wasn't the end. It never is with people like that. Time moved on. Grandma's legs slowed, her hands started trembling more than usual, but she still insisted on keeping Hank clean. She couldn't drive him anymore, but she'd sit in the passenger seat some mornings with a cup of tea, humming to old country songs and watching the wind sway through the oak trees. We'd offered to store the truck or cover it up, but she wouldn't have it. "This is my home. Hank belongs here." Then, last spring, Grandma got real quiet. The kind of quiet you feel deep in your bones. Her teacups sat untouched. The truck collected more dust than usual. And one day she asked me, real soft, if I'd promise not to let them take him. "I know they'll try," she said. "The minute I'm gone. They'll come for Hank." I promised. I swore on everything that mattered to me. She smiled and squeezed my hand. A month later, she passed in her sleep. We didn't even have the funeral service fully arranged before Karen's voice showed up again, this time not in person, but in an official HOA letter. I found it tucked into the mailbox the same afternoon I picked up Grandma's obituary printout. Subject: Violation, inoperable vehicle, non-compliant aesthetic. It was written like a robot with no soul had typed it. No condolence, no acknowledgement. Just the usual demand. Remove the vehicle within 10 days or face daily fines. I stood in the driveway, reading the paper, hands shaking. Not from anger, not yet. From disbelief. She hadn't even been buried yet. I walked over to the truck and opened the door. Creaked like always. The seat was stiff, and the steering wheel had that soft layer of dust on it that you only get from time and peace. I sat in the driver's side and just breathed. The smell hit me like a freight train, cinnamon, oil, garden dirt, and sun-baked leather. Like it had stored every memory of her, every ride to the market, every early morning plant sale, every chuckle and scolding she ever gave me in that front seat. I broke down right there. That truck wasn't an eyesore. It was a time machine. It was the last place where I could still hear her voice in my head clearly. The last place where she hadn't yet disappeared. I knew then, I wasn't going to let Karen win. Not this time. That truck had meaning. And if Karen couldn't see that, maybe it was time to show the whole town just how beautiful ugly could be. The morning after we laid Grandma to rest, the house was heavy with silence. You know, that kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels empty. The kind where even the ticking of the kitchen clock feels loud, like it's counting the seconds she's gone. I woke up early. Couldn't sleep much that night. Every corner of the house whispered of her. The dent in the wall from where she'd bumped into it with her walker. The tea kettle she never let me touch because I always overboiled it. Even the old quilt draped over the couch still held her smell, lavender, sugar cookies, and something warm and old I could never name. I stepped outside, mostly to get some air, and there it was. The note. Taped to Hank's windshield with perfect Scotch tape on all four corners like it was some museum exhibit. Karen had typed it out and even laminated it, as if she were proud of it. It read, "Dear homeowner, per Section 14, Paragraph 3 of the HOA Guidelines, your inoperable vehicle remains a visual nuisance and negatively impacts neighborhood aesthetic. This is your second official notice. Removal must occur within 5 business days to avoid enforcement action. HOA Aesthetic Committee." There was a little postscript scribbled in blue pen beneath it. Honestly, it's such an eyesore. Can't believe anyone would keep such a thing out in the open. Karen. I don't know what hit harder, her words or the timing. She knew. She knew we'd just buried my grandmother less than 24 hours earlier. She lived 3 houses down. She'd seen the procession. She'd watched from her porch as the hearse rolled by. She even waved at me, as if death was just another HOA notice she could check off. I stared at that note, heart pounding so hard it rang in my ears. My fingers clenched, and for a moment I thought about tearing it to shreds right there. But I didn't. No. I folded it neatly, like she had wanted it preserved. I walked inside, slid open Grandma's old cedar chest, and placed the note between her photo albums, right next to a picture of her standing beside Hank in 1964, grinning like she owned the whole damn town. I didn't tell anyone about the note right away. Not my dad, not my aunt who flew in from Wyoming, not even my cousin Rachel, who'd always had beef with Karen and would have gladly egged her car that same night. I needed to sit with it, process it, figure out what to do. That afternoon, I went out to the truck and just sat again. It was hot, humid, and the vinyl seat burned my legs, but I didn't care. I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the empty passenger seat. It felt like she should be there, arms crossed, rolling her eyes at Karen's nonsense, probably saying something like, "People like her ain't got roots. They just decorate." That's when I spotted something else. Across the street, in Karen's perfect little flower bed, trimmed hedges, concrete animal statues, fake butterflies, there was a new sign staked in the ground. Neighborhood Beautification Award, Karen Miller, HOA board member. It had a gold trim and everything. I swear I laughed out loud. I had to laugh, otherwise I'd have screamed. This woman was so obsessed with appearances that she gave herself an award. Meanwhile, the truck that carried produce to half the food pantries in town for 40 years was being called an eyesore. That's when the grief shifted. Up until then, I'd been swallowed in sadness, missing Grandma, aching in places I didn't know could ache. But suddenly, that ache turned into resolve. A kind of fire she would have lit herself. Karen wanted the truck gone? Fine. But not quietly. Not like some shameful thing you sweep under a rug. I was going to honor it. I was going to show everyone what that truck meant. That night, I opened up the old barn behind Grandma's house and dug out the box labeled Hank's Parts. It had spare tools, old license plates, the original rearview mirror, and even a greasy notebook with notes in Grandma's handwriting. Rattling noise equals check brake line. July 4th. Replace fan belt. Glove box smells like apples? She never stopped caring for him, not once. So I got to work. I knew some basics, but I wasn't a mechanic. I called up Mr. Bill from down the road. He used to help Grandma tune Hank up in the summers. He showed up with a jug of sweet tea and a rolling tool chest. "You're really gonna fire him up again?" he asked, grinning. "I have to," I said. Karen called him ugly. Bill let out a slow whistle. "Then we better make him shine." For the next several days we worked under that sun. Cleaned off the grime. Replaced the spark plugs. Changed the oil. Took a buffer to the hood. Repainted the lettering on the back that said, "Old but Gold." Grandma had added that herself after the HOA's first warning letter 2 years ago. Word spread fast. Neighbors started dropping by to help. Some brought supplies, others just sat in lawn chairs and watched, telling stories about Grandma. One woman, Miss Edna, who must have been pushing 90, dabbed her eyes and said, "Your grandma used to drive me to the clinic in that truck. She never missed a day, even when it rained." Someone else brought a photo from the county fair in '82, Grandma leaning on Hank, blue ribbon in hand. The more I heard, the more I realized something important. This truck didn't just carry her. It carried half the town. By the end of the week, Hank was running again. He wasn't perfect. He still sputtered if you tapped the gas too hard, and the radio only picked up AM stations, but he roared to life like he'd been waiting for someone to believe in him again. And I knew what I had to do next. I was going to take Hank where Karen couldn't ignore him. Not in a driveway. Not behind a fence. But in the middle of Main Street, leading the Founders' Day parade, just like Grandma had done once, decades ago. Because if they were going to see him as an eyesore, I was going to make sure it was the most beautiful damn sore they'd ever laid eyes on. It started with a phone call. One of those robo-voiced voicemails from the HOA's automated system that sounded like it was recorded in a dentist's office. "This is an official compliance reminder. Failure to remove non-operational vehicles from visible property areas may result in a fine of up to $150 per day, beginning immediately." I stood there holding my phone, listening to that robotic voice threaten me in the same tone you'd use to announce a 2-for-1 carpet sale. It didn't mention Grandma. It didn't mention her truck. It didn't care. And then, like clockwork, a letter followed 2 days later. This one in an envelope with the HOA seal and a line that read, "Final notice before enforcement." They'd attached photos. Karen must have taken them herself, probably crouching in her hydrangeas with her iPhone zoomed in like some undercover agent on a stakeout. One showed the truck before we'd started cleaning it up. Another was a close-up of the rear bumper with the chipped paint. The caption under it read, "Blight risk to neighborhood." Blight. That's what they called it. Not history. Not family. Not the thing that helped your grandma deliver meals to shut-ins every Sunday for 30 years. Just blight. The letter ended with a date, August 15th. That was the deadline. If the truck wasn't removed, they'd start fining me. Daily. Automatically. They included a form to request removal assistance. Like I was supposed to fill out a permission slip to erase the last piece of her. That night, I sat on the front porch, the sunset turning the sky to gold and peach, and looked out at Hank parked beneath the oak tree. His chrome grille caught the last of the light. The wind rustled through the trees, and I swear, I could hear her. "They can take their forms and fold them into paper planes." I smiled, even though my eyes were wet. No. I wasn't letting go. The next morning, I called City Hall. I wanted to know everything I could about the parade. Who ran it, how it worked, what it took to get a float registered. Turns out, the organizer was an older gentleman named Curtis, a retired vet who'd known Grandma from way back. "Wait a minute," he said. "You're Elaine's grandson?" "Yes, sir." He chuckled. "She once talked my ear off about how she could parallel park that old Ford better than half the people in town." "That's the one," I said. "And I want to enter it. In the Founders' Day parade." There was a pause. I imagined him leaning back in his chair, smiling with one of those far-off looks only old friends get when they remember someone who mattered. "You sure Hank can still move?" "Already got him running." He laughed. "Well then you're in. Slot 14, right behind the VFW." I felt a lump in my throat. Slot 14. That was the same slot Grandma used to have. Later that week, the fines started. I'd get a text, a voicemail, an email, every 24 hours like clockwork. $150 charge added to your account. This is your second enforcement infraction. Failure to comply may result in lien placement. Karen even stopped by the house once while I was washing Hank's tires. She didn't walk up. She just stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, eyes scanning the truck like she was inspecting a crime scene. "Still here?" she asked, voice sugary and sharp. "Yup. You know, some people are starting to talk. They say it's kind of desperate." I stood up straight, still holding the hose. Let him talk. Grandma didn't build her life to please people who couldn't tell the difference between rust and character. Karen smirked. "Character doesn't matter when it lowers property values." I took a step toward her. Calm. Even. My shirt soaked from the water, my hands shaking from restraint. "You think value only comes from new paint and tidy lawns. But some things? They're priceless. This truck has carried food, flowers, people, and stories. It's earned its place." She opened her mouth like she was about to say something clever, but then shut it. Maybe she saw the look in my eyes. Maybe, for a split second, she realized she'd picked the wrong battle. Over the next few days, people in the neighborhood started noticing. At first, it was just a few head nods, a neighbor waving as I sanded the side panels. One of the older ladies walking her dog left a little note tucked under the windshield wiper. "I remember this truck from the harvest fair. Your grandma gave me free tomatoes when I couldn't afford them. Keep going." Then, something wild happened. A small local newspaper, the Hollow Pines Gazette, showed up at the house. Some young journalist named Morgan had heard about the truck through Curtis, the parade organizer. "I'm doing a piece on local legacies," she said. "Curtis said I should talk to you about the truck with heart." She interviewed me on the porch, took pictures of the truck, asked about Grandma, about Karen. I didn't badmouth her directly. Didn't need to. I just told the truth. That some people only see surface, but others know what history feels like when it hums under your hands. When the article came out, it was titled, "More Than Metal: How One Grandson is Turning Grief into Grit." And right there, front and center, was Hank. Shining. Proud. Unapologetic. By the time the second week of fines hit, something had changed. Neighbors started sending in their own letters to the HOA. Letters about Grandma, about how she'd helped raise their kids, brought soup when they were sick, drove them to appointments. One family down the road started parking their own vintage car out front in solidarity. Another painted a wooden sign that said, "Old doesn't mean useless." Karen tried to call an emergency HOA meeting to push the fine into lien status. But when the vote came down, it failed. By one vote. Apparently, Mr. Jenkins, the old, quiet HOA treasurer, had changed his stance after reading the newspaper article. He told Karen, in front of everyone, "I'd rather have 10 old trucks like that than one more letter from you." The fines stopped. But I wasn't done. Because now it was almost parade day. And Hank wasn't just going to roll through town. He was going to ride like royalty, with Grandma's picture in the passenger seat, and a story the whole town would hear. I'll never forget the morning of the parade. The sun came up slow and golden, just like Grandma used to say it should, not too fast, like it knows folks are waking up with sore backs. The whole town was already buzzing before 8. Kids were running down the sidewalks waving tiny flags, the smell of kettle corn drifted through the air, and the high school marching band was already tuning up somewhere near the old courthouse. Hank was ready. I had spent every spare second that week cleaning, shining, and fine-tuning him down to the smallest detail. The rusted tailgate had been scrubbed and polished, but not completely redone. I wanted to keep that spot where Grandma used to sit and peel apples. The paint job was still a little uneven in places, but that didn't matter. He looked alive again. Not showroom pretty, something better. Real. In the passenger seat, I taped up a framed photo of Grandma. It was the one from the 1982 parade. Her in her denim overalls and a red bandana, standing next to Hank with a first-place ribbon in her hand and a smirk that could knock you flat. I printed a sign and placed it across the back. In loving memory of Elaine Harper, she drove more than a truck. She drove a legacy. At 9 a.m. sharp, I pulled into the staging area. I was lined up between the VFW float and the county animal shelter, who had a bunch of dogs in little costumes barking like mad. Folks were walking up and down the line of parade entries, chatting, admiring, taking pictures. Then I saw Curtis, the parade coordinator, walking over with his clipboard and a grin. "Lord have mercy," he said, resting a hand on the hood. "Hank's back from the grave." "Feels that way," I replied. He leaned in and looked through the windshield at the photo of Grandma. "She'd be proud, you know." I nodded, suddenly too choked up to say anything. Then I heard a voice I'd recognize anywhere. "Well, this is certainly a creative interpretation of parade standards." Karen. She was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed tight, flanked by two other HOA board members who clearly didn't want to be there. She had on a floral blouse that screamed "Respectable Patriot," and she was holding a clipboard like she was about to issue citations to the marching band. "You're really going through with this?" she asked, one eyebrow raised. I looked at her. I could have yelled. I could have reminded her how she'd called the truck a blight. How she taped that laminated insult to my grandmother's legacy not even a day after her funeral. But I didn't. Instead I said, "He belongs here." Just like she did. Karen scoffed, made a note on her clipboard, and stormed off. The two board members stayed behind and gave me a thumbs up before catching up with her. The horn sounded at 10 a.m. and the parade began. As the VFW float pulled out ahead of me, I shifted Hank into gear, gently pressed the pedal, and felt him rumble forward. The crowd lining Main Street was massive, bigger than I'd expected. People on folding chairs, kids on their parents' shoulders, veterans in hats waving flags. And as Hank rolled by, I heard murmurs. "That's Elaine's truck. Didn't she win a ribbon back in the 80s? I used to ride in the back of that thing to church. Lord, I thought they'd towed it away." I didn't wave. I didn't honk. I just drove, slow and steady, letting Hank do the talking. And he did. Every little rattle, every puff from the tailpipe, every creak of the suspension told a story. Not just about Grandma, but about the people she helped, the seeds she planted, the lives she touched without ever asking for anything in return. At one point, an elderly woman stood up from her chair and saluted. I didn't know her, but I saluted back. About halfway down the parade route, something incredible happened. The marching band behind me began to play "You Are My Sunshine." I don't know if it was planned or coincidence, but my throat tightened. That was Grandma's favorite song. She used to hum it when she cooked. She even taught it to me on the piano when I was 7, her fingers dancing over the keys like lightning despite the arthritis in her knuckles. I rolled down the window and let the music fill the cab. People started singing, clapping, even crying. One woman near the bakery reached out and touched the side of the truck as we passed, whispering "Thank you" like it was a prayer. And then there was Karen. She was standing dead center on the reviewing platform, trying her best to pretend she wasn't fuming. She wore a strained smile, like she knew cameras were on her but couldn't quite keep her lip from twitching. As Hank rolled by, I caught her eye and gave a small, polite nod. She didn't nod back. But the woman next to her, the mayor, stood up and gave me a standing ovation. The crowd followed, cheering, whistling, applause that felt like it reached the heavens. I swear, in that moment, I could feel Grandma's hand on my shoulder. When the parade ended, people swarmed the truck. Veterans came by to shake my hand. Old-timers took selfies with Hank. Local reporters wanted quote. Kids asked if they could sit in the front seat. One girl, maybe 10 years old, traced the outline of the old but gold lettering and whispered, "I want a truck like this when I grow up." I let her climb in. That night, back at the house, I parked Hank right back where he belonged, beneath the old oak tree. There was no HOA letter waiting this time. No threats. Just a bundle of sunflowers left at the base of the bumper with a card that said, "Thank you for reminding us what beauty really looks like." I sat in the truck for a long time. Windows down. Photo of Grandma still on the seat beside me. And I knew. She'd never really left. She just passed the keys on. It's funny how sometimes the biggest moments in life are quiet at first. Later, when people tell the story, they'll add drama, make it sound like a movie. But when it actually happens, it's almost still, almost slow. That's how it felt when I turned onto Main Street for the final stretch of the parade and saw the crowd rise to its feet. It started with just a few people, old-timers who'd known Grandma, folks she'd helped with groceries or garden seeds, or the occasional stern but loving lecture when their kids got too rowdy. They stood up, hats over hearts, eyes glassy. Then it rippled, row by row, block by block. And as I rolled past the main reviewing stand, the whole town was standing. Applauding. Cheering. Some crying. Not for me. Not even just for Hank. But for her. I looked straight ahead, gripping the wheel tight, doing everything I could to keep it together. My chest felt like it might cave in from all the emotions boiling up at once. Grief, pride, gratitude, even a little bit of righteous anger that had finally found its home. And then, there she was. Karen. Front and center on that little platform under the big white canopy, still holding that clipboard like it might protect her from public opinion. She wasn't clapping. Her lips were pursed so tight they'd turned the color of chalk. Her knuckles were white, gripping the edge of the podium. She looked like she had just swallowed a lemon. And her jaw literally dropped. Wide-eyed. Speechless. Watching the town, she thought she ran cheer for the truck she called junk. The same truck she tried to fine into extinction. The same one she tried to erase, like it was clutter, instead of a chapter in the town's story. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. I just nodded at her. And I swear, that drove her crazier than anything else I could have done. After the parade, the crowd funneled into the town square for hot dogs, pie contests, and raffle drawings. Hank was parked near the gazebo with a sign explaining his story, Grandma's history, the fights with the HOA, the way the community had rallied behind him. People took pictures with him like he was a celebrity. A local artist painted a little watercolor of him on the spot and gave it to me for free. Said it was his way of saying thank you. Kids asked questions like, "Did it really drive all the way here? And can I honk the horn?" I let a few of them. One kid said it sounded like a dinosaur coughing. Older folks came up to shake my hand, but some didn't say anything at all. They just laid their palm on the hood for a second, like they were saying hello to an old friend. And then Karen approached. I saw her heels first, clicking on the sidewalk like she meant business. Clipboard still in hand, of course. She stopped a few feet from the truck and glanced at the crowd. Then she leaned in close and said, "I hope you're happy." I looked her dead in the eye and replied, "Actually, I am." She scoffed. "You know this sets a bad precedent. You're encouraging non-compliance. Sentimentality doesn't override rules." That's when something surprising happened. Before I could even answer, Mr. Jenkins, the treasurer of the HOA, the same one who'd changed his vote and blocked the fines, stepped up beside us. He adjusted his glasses, looked Karen in the eye, and said, "Maybe if the rules don't leave space for respect, they're the wrong rules." Karen looked like she'd been slapped with a wet newspaper. She turned to say something else, but Jenkins wasn't done. He gestured toward the truck and said, "This isn't non-compliance. It's heritage. If the board can't tell the difference, maybe we need a new board." The small crowd around us, who'd started pretending not to listen, suddenly really started listening. Karen blinked, sputtered, then spun on her heel and walked off, clipboard bouncing against her side like a tail between her legs. Later that week, a vote was called at the HOA meeting, open to the community this time. Karen tried to reintroduce the motion to ban inoperable vehicles permanently from all visible lots, regardless of context. It failed. Unanimously. Then another motion passed, to allow exceptions for vehicles of historical and community significance, to be reviewed case by case. They named the new guideline after Grandma. The Elaine Harper Clause. A month passed. Then two. The flowers from the parade eventually wilted, the signs faded in the rain, but Hank? He stayed. Polished. Proud. Parked right under the oak tree like he never left. Sometimes I sit in him on quiet evenings, radio on low, letting the wind through the windows carry the sounds of the town she loved so much. One evening, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a soft cream envelope, handwritten in careful script. Inside was a short note. I voted against Karen. I should have done it sooner. Your grandmother once brought me soup when I had pneumonia and no family nearby. I never forgot that. I hope you don't sell the truck. We need reminders like that. I folded the note, placed it beside the first one, Karen's laminated insult, in Grandma's cedar chest. Because together they tell the full story. The hate, the healing, the legacy. So now when people ask about the truck, ask why I keep it, ask if I'll ever sell it, I tell them the truth. It's not just a vehicle. It's not just rust and chrome. It's a promise. To remember where we came from. To honor the people who built this place when nobody was watching. To make sure that no matter how polished things get on the outside, we never forget what matters on the inside. And every Founder's Day, without fail, Hank leads the parade. Engine rumbling. Tires steady. Photo of Grandma riding shotgun. And somewhere in the crowd I imagine Karen still watches. Still silent. Still stunned. And the town? Still cheering.